well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment.
Leigh and I are, again, at Voo Doo Firearms with owner Joe Schiavone and his lovely wife, Laura. Really appreciate you guys having us back.
For sure. It's been too long.
It has.
I've been wanting to come back sooner. And
it was so much fun the last time you guys were here. And
yeah, I agree.
It was a riot.
Yeah.
I know we have said it a couple times. We probably could have gone 2 more hours.
Oh yeah.
Just, with the information bouncing off one another, it was great. And I do remember your answer to this question, so I will ask Laura. What does the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution mean to you personally?
Well, what it says is the right to keep and bear arms. But for me, I feel like it was very specifically written to prevent governments from getting out of control.
Gotcha.
Very clearly. I think that we've seen a lot of niceties, people looking for acceptance and talking about hunting and personal protection and all of that. But I think if we're going to be fair, that's what I think that, and I think it's great for those things also, but I think it was very, knowing where they were at that time, what they were thinking when they wrote it.
Yeah, I agree with you very much, and it seems as though hunting gets dragged into it very often for one reason or another, but I think it had very little to do with hunting.
Yeah.
And Joe, when we were talking, you were, if I recall correctly, like an absolutist. You think if the government can own a firearm or a weapon, then
we should have A-10s. I'll line them up down the street. Let's go.
Do you share that sentiment that it's absolute, or do you believe in some sort of reasonable regulation with that?
I do not believe it's absolute. I believe in some reasonable regulation. I am kind of in the middle of the road. I think that there's a time and a place for some regulation, but I think that, like most other people think, that you give an inch and people tend to take a mile. So
sure,
I think we might be approaching that.
I think that's probably why I'm an absolutist, is I've learned that for every one you give them, they take 10. Mm-hmm. So you can't give. The second you start giving in, we start losing.
Yeah, one of our more recent podcasts, we had Vince Logan on from Will County Board, and I had actually said something on there I don't think I'd said on any of our podcasts, because I take it pretty far, where I actually believe that, say, like felons should be okay to have a firearm if they have served their sentence, and if they had to go to prison and they're in prison for 12 years or whatever the duration is, and the court system says they have paid their debt to society, then when they come out of prison, then they should be afforded that right once again. And that gets a little tricky with, is the court system operating properly, or are they letting people out that maybe they shouldn't? Yeah. But I think that if you're in good standing in society, that you should be able to pretty much own anything.
Leigh, I think you're a history teacher, right?
I am.
So I don't.
Well, put the history teacher on the spot.
No, it's super interesting. So I don't know the historical background to it as to when I'm confident that wasn't something that was always in keeping with Heller, where it was text and tradition, where if you were a felon, you lost your right to a firearm. So at what point, I wonder, did we actually switch that? Like, where did we click that to? Did it happen in the 1900s, 1800s? I don't know. So
it's a good question. I'm not, history's like this really, really big, huge thing.
Sure.
And, there are areas where I'm strong and there's areas where I'm weak. And even in the areas where I'm strong,
Sure.
There's so much to know. And, it's a long way of saying, I really don't know the answer to that. I'm not the, of this group. Mm-hmm. I'm probably maybe one of the least informed as far as Second Amendment and keeping up with all the current laws and things like that. I really am sort of like on the training. The training part of this stuff is really what drives me. So yeah, I don't think I have a good question. What are you asking exactly? Because I feel like
when did it become
Has that always been part of it?
No, I don't think it has.
Gun Control Act of 1968.
Okay, it was in '68, so the NFA.
That's
Yeah.
that's-
So they brought it out on the NFA. So prior to '68, if you were a convicted felon and you served your time, you didn't have a problem. So I think that, you know what, Joe, I probably agree with you.
I
mean,
think
now,
a case by case basis. I think it might.
again, I mean, you give or you don't.
and once it becomes subjective,
Right.
Yeah, who makes
then
those decisions?
humans make those decisions,
Yeah.
Right.
and then there's flaws in those decisions. I think what becomes the conversation then is who should be let out of prison for what crimes they committed,
And that's a great question.
which,
Right.
which is a separate issue.
I mean, we have people that are convicted felons that we all know very publicly right now. Convicted felons. Should somebody of a white collar crime as a convicted felon never be allowed to own a firearm again?
There's traffic violations that are felonies.
Yes.
So if you were, reckless driving 138 and a 55, does that mean that your right to your right to carry a firearm should be taken away? And I don't think so.
I agree with you.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Look at that, making headway.
Wow. Laura, I was interested in finding out, like, have your views morphed over the years? Like, are your views on the Second Amendment consistent with when you were younger? I know my wife always says that, so many of her views have changed since college and things like that. And I was just wondering if you felt this way. Obviously there was a time before you guys were gun store owners.
Well, I was a Democrat
Yeah. Oh,
when I was
okay.
younger.
Were you really?
Okay.
Yeah. I'm from a blue collar family, a union worker family.
Us too.
And I think that collectively, I think it was Ross Perot was running when my father, who was a union operator, a local 150 operator, jumped on the Republican bandwagon. And I think I was right at that age when I was probably 22. So I think that I became more knowledgeable about all the current situation and what was going on. And because of that, I changed my views also. I mean, I think you need to really be educated about it to really have a strong viewpoint. So yeah, I would say that it changed. As far as the Second Amendment is concerned, I mean, I've always felt that people should have those rights. But if I'm being honest, I didn't dig into law or care much about politics before 2015.
Okay.
Fairly recently then.
Very recently. I just didn't care. I got up, I went to
Did
work.
your dad-
I was a mom. I did my stuff
Right.
until I started to feel a shift politically with regard to laws and rights. And
Do you know what your parents' views on firearms were?
Yeah, so I think that has shifted, generally speaking. I think that my parents were always very,
Yeah, your dad had firearms.
absolutely, they were very pro Second Amendment, even though they were Democrats. But I feel like the whole idea of that party and which party you belong to has shifted drastically since that time. So I don't know today, even back then, I don't know. Knowing my father, and you, Joe, you know my father, I think even if you rewind back to my kid
He
age,
probably, yeah, he was probably voting Democrat because
he was a union guy.
He was a union guy. I think his views were pretty strongly rooted in conservatism.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I think there's a lot of people that's happened to, and I think we're seeing a resurgence of that. And I think, oddly enough, I think the Second Amendment is really kind of pushing that envelope, especially here in Illinois, where we're being
Definitely.
absolutely suppressed. And you're seeing it in the people that come in here and the people that we're interacting with on a daily basis. You get customers that come in. It's been 18 months since this law went into effect. And there's people that come in here and go, "Why don't you have any ARs up?" And I'm like, "Have you been living under a rock?"
Right.
People don't even know that this law exists. And I think that
Really?
pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. And that's an old saying that can be applied to a lot of things. And I think that's exactly what's gone on here. And at least in Illinois, I think that they had a good thing going and they had some pretty stiff criteria and some pretty stiff bans. And I think they just got a little bit too greedy with what their demands. And I think that they probably wouldn't have seen much if I think we were at a point here where there was no pushback anymore. Everybody was just kind of going with it. They just stepped one step too far over the line.
That makes sense. And the gun control issue for a long time has been used as a political football. And it's, without getting into knowing what people are thinking, it's not a stretch for me to say that people that wanted it passed and applauded this most recent ban on firearms know that it's unconstitutional. They also know at some point it's going to be overturned. And then when it does and something else terrible happens, that becomes the politics of saying, we tried to prevent this and we were overruled. And that's when politics come into something. To me, the 27 words on the wall over there, there's not a lot of interpretation there, but people have created the ambiguity in it for personal or political reasons, I think.
I agree with you. And I think, and honestly, I think what's really interesting about what you said is they're using it as a political tool to say, look, we tried to stop it, right? What about the things that are happening on the daily that are happening because law-abiding citizens aren't allowed to protect themselves? And you guys are both instructors. I mean, there's an egregious amount of time and places where these kinds of things are happening. And you go up into Highland Park, where that's what spurred this whole thing, right? You go into Highland Park and you start looking at the crime rates in Highland Park. They're shooting through the roof. And that's not open to interpretation.
And the rules that they put in place since then would not have prevented what happened in Highland Park anyway. So it didn't do anything to prevent an incident of that sort.
But your average person,
well, they don't know,
isn't aware of all of that. So they can read a headline, they can hear a radio clip, and if that's all that is given to them,
they think that their politician has done
what they take
for
with
their
them.
Community.
And that's why programs like 2A Today are so very, very important.
That's a lot of why we're doing it.
It's truly why it's so important, is we've got to get the word out, and we've got to let people know what we're doing and why. I mean, gun shops are not evil. Training is not evil. Ignorance is evil. And making sure that you have the necessary information to formulate an opinion. We've all seen the video of the politician who picks up the AR and, it weighs like a ton, and it kicks like a mule. You can tune an AR to have no recoil. If you tune it properly, have none. So people who are watching these things and who are being intentionally misled should be angry at the intentional misleading over what we're seeing in reality.
I may have mentioned, I'm not sure, on our website, Leigh and I occasionally write a blog. And the first blog I wrote, I believe I titled it "Capitalizing on Ignorance."
For sure.
And for people that haven't walked into a gun store and learned anything from just having a conversation or taking a class with a couple of qualified instructors that show them very safe ways and efficient ways to own a firearm, be proficient, be efficient, and safe. If people haven't done any of that, most of their information they're applying to firearms comes from a television show or the media.
Yep.
Do you know that most people that come in here still think that you can just buy a gun online?
I did not know that. I'm not surprised to hear that, because I have heard that. The notion
buy a gun online.
You
kind of can.
In theory, you kind of can.
To go to an FFL.
You still have to go through the background check. But they think it's you get on, Rural King,
Anonymous.
Or you get on whatever website, you pay for it, you order it, you give them your information, and a few days later it shows up at your doorstep. Not accurate at all.
No, and we as a shop, one of our things that we do is we do specialize in first-time buyers. We love first-time buyers. Come in. If I don't have it, it's okay. I don't expect to have everything that you're going to want. But come in, get an idea. If I don't have it, I'll send you down the street to go to the range, go rent some stuff, figure out what fits your hand, come back and we'll help you. And the benefit to coming to a small shop like Voo Doo Firearms or something over, a Range USA or a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shops, is what I tell people is, here, I know you're unfamiliar, and I want you to be comfortable. So after you go shoot, come back. I'll show you how to clean it. We'll take it apart a dozen times before you leave here, so you understand. So you understand what we're doing. I'll take it apart, we'll field strip it, we'll clean it, then go shoot, come back, we'll clean it again, just so you're comfortable. You'd be surprised. A lot of people do take us up on that, and we don't charge for it. It's just a courtesy because it's the right thing to do. It's to help educate.
That's great to hear. And another thing that you get in a family-owned store like this, as opposed to, some of the big box stores that you mentioned, is that obviously those guys order a lot in bulk.
Yeah. And
if something is sitting around for a little while, they get the word from management. Hey, let's try and move this. We wanted this is we need to move this. So when you're speaking to a sales consultant that isn't necessarily trying to steer you the wrong way, but they do have motivation.
They have an agenda.
Have an agenda to maybe push a particular firearm because they've got too many of them in the stockroom or something like that. And I came by Sunday to pick up a firearm that I purchased from you. And if you recall, that gentleman came in, and he was a first-time buyer. And I held off finishing the paperwork because I was just really curious to watch that interaction. And I loved it. Yeah, I did, because it was a first-time firearm purchaser for conceal carry, and he was starting from scratch. And it's very interesting to me because it's been a very long time since I didn't know anything about firearms.
Sure.
So to see the questions that someone might have, or their approach to what they may want and why, was all very, and that's one of the reasons I stuck around as long as I did, because I just wanted to watch that interaction, and I loved it. And he walked out of here, he purchased a firearm, he went through the paperwork, and he left here smiling, and I have to believe very content, because there was a lot of knowledge given to him in a matter of 15 minutes, give or take, and it was all very personable. So I waited, because I knew we were doing this podcast. I waited to tell you that I thought that was great, the way you helped that young man.
I'm glad, and we give anybody who comes in the door that same courtesy. If you're a guy who's been shooting your whole life, or if you're a guy who's the first time you've ever held a firearm in your hand, I mean, or a woman, doesn't matter, but whatever it may be, I think it's important to connect. I think it's important to, and we talked about this last time, I think it's important to pull that veil back. It's important to say, this is the reality of what a firearm is, and this is the reality of what we do and how we do it. And hey, I'll tell people right out of the gate, hey, this is what we do. And if I buy a firearm, and this is something that's probably unique to Voo Doo Firearms, probably stupid on my part, but I do it anyways. If I buy a firearm from the wholesaler, and I get it on sale, I'll put it in the cabinet with the same markup that I put on everything. Now, it could be sitting next to the same one, the exact same part number, and the one next to it's $50 more than this one. And it's because I got a $50 discount. And so if you come in and it's cheaper and it's the same part number, that's what's up. And so it behooves our regulars, and they come in and they watch for stuff like that, because they can get discounts and sales. We don't run sales because we're not trying to rape you blind. We're trying to make all our money on one sale. What we're trying to do is we're trying to establish a relationship with you where you keep wanting to come back, and where you want to tell your friends. I haven't told you guys yet, but we did take over the back area.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. I wanted to know.
We finally took it over.
Great.
And so we're in the process of demolition right now, and so we've got a lot of. I'm drowning in stuff to do, but as is Laura, we're just drowning in stuff. But it's awesome because it's our stuff. You know what I mean? It's not
100%.
It's a true labor of love, and so going back and taking care of the things that we're taking care of, and expanding it out, and the concepts and ideas that we have, and it's kind of the sky's the limit, and it's really fun. And you, Laura, stumbled into the I can't think of what it's called.
Virtual training. So, and that kind of ties back to I was going to ask earlier, because you've done so much work with training and I have not yet. Have you? And it ties in with what you were saying earlier about first-time buyers. Do you see a lot of people that come to your CCL class that don't even own a firearm yet?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because
Probably.
I see this side of it, and that is they come in with their CCL and their FOID, and they're telling us that they're first-time buyers, and we're,
Yeah.
I realize that you
Yeah,
probably
lots
see
of
the
lots
other
of trainers have guns that they either rent. I don't rent mine. If somebody doesn't have a firearm, they're welcome to use something that I do have for their training. But yeah, I want to say that maybe upwards of 15 to 20% of people that have trained with me haven't bought a firearm yet, and I tell them not to. I go, all right, don't buy anything.
Yeah.
You haven't bought anything, don't buy anything. Get some knowledge first. And at least then you're going in, excuse the pun, you're armed with some information
Well, that's why I'm
about
excited.
what you might want and what you might be looking for.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are times where I've toyed with the idea of being an FFL because I know I could sell certain guns, but I've never done that. I'm not really interested in doing that.
Well, he was talking about I had stumbled into a virtual training, and it was the system that they were using was Milo, and I think the Milo training is what, and not I think, I know it's what police departments and use for virtual training. So their systems, when I thought I was going to pull it up, and the original system that it started at $15,000. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And it went up to like 45, depending on what module you were using. But I thought it was fantastic. And it was just a regular room. It only had 3 walls, but I don't think it definitely wasn't more than 15 by 15, maybe 12 by 12. Big screen. And it's just a projection of scenarios.
Yes.
And I think that it's so important, and we're very seriously looking into getting that here. In fact, that's on my to-do list.
I think
is
that's
to
amazing.
Research it, because I think there's one thing that stood out to me is that the more I learned through this process, the more I realized I didn't know.
Absolutely.
And now I'm just
I would say that there's equal to, and speaking to you two is probably better, but I would say there's equal to or more value in that kind of training than just going to a range and lobbing off rounds.
for sure, because
There's no doubt.
one of the things that I know was after my training, I realized that some of the ways that I was carrying and how quickly, when I heard that statistic that an attacker can close a 21-foot distance in 1.5 seconds from 21 feet, that is not enough time for me to dig my firearm out of my purse or whatever holster I had it in and defend myself. So that was one of my aha moments, and was a real awakening where we could move on into some virtual training and all of that good stuff.
So that's one of the questions I had. I'm really interested in your experience. You went to get your instructor certification with the USCCA, right?
Yes.
And I was just wondering what your experiences were like.
I'd say it was really eye-opening, is what I think. I think it's important that everybody, that I think the concealed carry license is step one. And I think that if you're really serious about having that and using it as a real means of protection, that you really need to be serious about it and look into more training with, Leigh, or whatever. I think you need to seek more training. When you think about pistol, or holster draws and how quickly you have to react, and then learning about how severe you will be scrutinized if you actually use that firearm in a self-defense situation.
Absolutely.
While I was doing through the training, the first thing I did was I pulled up the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. And I started watching that again, where the prosecutors went at him. And I was literally able to look at them and say, from each moment, where he was trying to show that he could have walked away, he could have ran away, he didn't need to use deadly force. And so that's what I mean when I say that I learned more about what I didn't know, and so now I'm just seeking knowledge. But I think you learn more from dry fire drills and training and holster drawing. That, I mean, the range is just a part of it, but I actually don't think it's the biggest part.
How did you feel about the quality of training that you got?
I thought it was fantastic.
Great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Do you want to plug anybody that did it? Do you want to?
Well, so the USCCA and I think it's Jeff Nix that's out in Plano.
Good.
He was my instructor. He was very, very knowledgeable, very friendly, very comfortable in his classroom, and they really taught. What was really nice is, I've already come in there with my concealed carry license. They really teach you how to engage with your students so that they're engaged, so they're not falling asleep, so that they also understand the importance and they understand what deadly force, when that's an option. They understand different levels of awareness, and that once you have a CCL license, you really should be kind of walking around in that level yellow of awareness, where you're not just on your phone, not paying attention. I think and it's not meant to make you a paranoid person or have anxiety. It's just meant to be real. We're in a world now where I think you really need to be aware of your surroundings, probably more so today than you were, say, 30 years ago. So, but I thought
30 months ago.
Yeah, I thought the training was fantastic, and
Good.
I thought it focused enough on marksmanship, but more on understanding the laws, understanding when it's appropriate to use, and understanding the value of life and the consequences of actually pulling that out. So I thought it approached that more than any other training program.
Excellent. It's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We, you mentioned you asked a question about first-time firearms buyers having already done training, and the other thing that I come across a lot is are people who have done their concealed carry once or twice and don't feel confident. And this goes into what you were talking about, is doing some kind of continuation training or quarterly training to work on your skills. I find that people that do things like this, that take these kinds of classes, are very conscientious. They feel very responsible, and that's why they take that extra step. Most people, don't take that idea of protecting their family, or even they outsource it, right? They expect the police to do it, or what have you, and not advocating that people become take the law into their own hands.
Sure.
But most people, they outsource that stuff to someone else. We'll rely on someone else to take care of that problem for us. But they come to my class, and many of them aren't carrying. And I ask them why. And they say, well, I don't feel confident enough. I don't feel like my skills are high enough. And of course, training once every 5 years, they're really not.
It's not enough.
They're not going to get better.
On the one hand, it's hurting someone with a handgun is a very simple thing to do. I tell people all the time, point the round hole at somebody and push the button. And it's pretty simple. And at the ranges that self-defense takes place, it's really that much simple. And sometimes I just want to go, okay, thank you, your class is over for today.
Sure.
And so there is that part of it. Criminals kill people all the time without any training at all. In fact, the reverse of training. It's but most people, like I said, they're like uber conscientious about it, and they come and they're not even carrying because they feel like they need to do more.
Yeah.
And so I think the sky's the limit, possibly for potentially for your training, especially if you do something where you've got simulators and stuff like that. I think that there's a population of people that are looking for opportunities to train. It doesn't, Joe, like you said, it doesn't always have to wind up where you're putting holes in paper targets. There are many other ways to
other
build those
options.
skills.
We have, like, the
and some of them are
Mantis system
better.
now, and-
yeah,
yeah.
some of them are even better. So
So it's funny you were talking about outsourcing the responsibility.
Yeah.
And so what I find is that the people in the firearms community, typically, not all, but most, right? I would say that they take self-preparation pretty seriously. And so the people who are carrying regularly are also typically people who are preparing for the inevitable or possibilities. And so you'll see those are the same people that are buying plate carriers. They're the same people buying MREs, and they're preparing for those things. And so it's a lifestyle.
But I mean, we live in the Midwest, Joe. We lived in Joliet. That's not the middle of nowhere. We were without power and water for 3 days over a bad storm.
Yeah.
We had no, and we were on well and septic, so that meant we had no running water.
Right.
We had no stove because we had an electric stove, and we were just right here.
Yeah.
And then, we had, that was from a bad summer storm. We had a bad winter storm where we got so much snow in a main thoroughfare that I actually started having a panic attack because the snowplows hadn't come by and 2 days had passed, and he couldn't get his pickup truck out of the driveway. I mean, it was no joke. So when you start realizing that it's more than just, preparing end of the world or whatever,
It's just a lifestyle. Like I said,
it
it's a
absolutely is.
Yeah.
You just start thinking about, well, what if I broke down? I didn't have,
taking some responsibility for
Yeah.
your own
for your own
self-sufficiency.
safety, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So instead of outsourcing, you bring that back in and you go, you know what? I am responsible for myself, and I'm responsible for the things that happen to me, and I'm going to control the controllables. And having a backpack in my car is a controllable. Having a firearm on my person is a controllable. These are the controllables. And so I see a lot of people that come through the door that are working diligently to get to that point. And so it's interesting from my perspective as a shop owner, and then you guys as the trainers, to really, because I can extrapolate a lot of what the people are looking for or seeing through your guys' eyes. So it's really cool to see.
Well, and I'm just an infant learning to walk compared to Leah or
But that's but it's so exciting though. I'm learning all the time as well. I've grown as an instructor over the years. I'm still learning things. You will too. It's really cool that you're at the beginning because the learning curve is going to be really steep. I have to sort of like search around and find, either trainers or people with particular experience, and then that gets transmitted to me. And every once in a while, I have some light bulb moments, but they're not as frequent as they were when I was first starting out. So you've got all that really cool stuff, like right there, just waiting for you.
Laura recently certified as USCCA instructor.
Yes.
And what are your goals? Do you have short-term, long-term goals with that?
Great question, Joe.
So I would find that I'm more passionate about it than I thought I was going to be.
Great.
I really thought that I was just it was going to be something that, that the Voodoo store offered because, people come in here, do you offer renewal classes? Do you have CCL classes? And we had a lot of inquiries. We had a lot of women that just, for whatever reason, just wanted to be taught by another woman. And I think that they had the preconceived notion about that
We
because
should give a shout out to Edwina because she's the one who really drove that.
yeah,
She
but-
drove that idea.
yeah, and she and I anybody that I've ever learned from, whether it be when I first got my CCL or even with you, Lee, like anybody that I've or Jeff Nix have always been wonderful and very friendly and never never condescended to me or made me feel like a question was stupid. So they've been wonderful, but there must be some sort of
I think you got lucky.
maybe
Agreed.
there's some preconceived notion.
There's
The industry, I think we talked about this last time. The industry as a whole is just full of
Men.
crabby guys. They're just crabby.
I'll tell you my first experience in this was when we went to SHOT Show last year.
2 years ago.
Was it 2 years? By the end of day one, I was so angry, I didn't even want to go back.
Really?
I have never been,
They wouldn't even look at her. Wouldn't even talk to her.
this is such a male. Now, I'm not a shrinking violet. I'm not. I've been a real estate agent for 23 years, and I know that this is now more of a female-dominated industry. But even today, if I get involved in the commercial, that is a very male-dominated sector of the real estate.
Okay.
Oh, I can't even get a return phone call. And my good friend colleagues, like Omar, I will call him and say, can you call this guy? Because he's not calling me back, you know. And they will. And he'll call him and leave a message, and he'll get a call back within a couple hours. So when we went to SHOT Show, I mean, even it was at one of the booths we were at, I was looking at purses. It was a whole display. The vendor was a purse vendor, and we had walked up collectively to talk about, I was thinking about what we could bring in the store.
Oh, to offer to customers.
That woman looked away from me and started speaking to him and blew me off as the two of us were standing next to each other. And
I had to walk away.
He had to walk away before she would.
Because you saw what was going on.
I'm trying to engage those two because I don't know anything about a purse, like
Right.
Whatever, right? So I'm like, she's talking to me, and I keep trying to redirect her. She didn't want nothing to do with me. So eventually, I literally had to walk away so that they could have a conversation.
That's really interesting. I'm learning all of it. Like I said.
Yeah, when it
Like,
first
this isn't
happened-
firearms related.
No.
Directly, but
he didn't
learn stuff all the time.
It's the industry, and that's
Yeah.
and that is truly. And I'm sorry,
I mean, Joe didn't even notice it was happening. So it was my very first. It was shortly after we had just opened the store here, the storefront in November, and so this was in February. So he asked me, "You got to come with me now that we're in a storefront. I really need you more involved. If you have the time, I really would like you more involved in this." And so I agreed to do that, and that's how I started. That's why I ended up just recently getting my instructor's license, and so I went with him to this. And being somebody that was, knew very little to nothing about firearms and all of this industry. I mean, I had worked with them a little bit, but I knew more of the back office stuff. And finally I know I wasn't being sensitive to it until it happened for the 27th time that day, that I actually, when we went to eat lunch and I took him to the corner and I was like, I don't know if you realize it's happening. I was so angry. And I said, I was speaking and asking a question, and they literally started talking over me and went like this and started talking to him. It was blatant.
That's mind blowing.
It was unbelievable. And
Yeah, me too. I'm shocked.
And I don't hold any grudges.
No, I don't think it was.
that it's not intentional.
Right, I
I
think
get
so
it
too. Yeah,
but
yeah. Or
once
at least that's what we like.
We want.
I think that's it's wiser to
once I told it to him, and then we went to the next booth. He was like, oh, "No shit, like it happened."
Oh yeah, you really noticed it. Then you start looking for it. That's crazy.
So here's what I would encourage you to do, and for anybody who's listening. So if you're a knowledgeable firearms person, go to a shop and pretend like you don't know anything, and watch the way you're treated. It's so wildly different. There's a store which will remain nameless. We all know it. It's on Route 30, and they treat everybody poorly. But I went in as an FFL, and I was so condescended. I was offended. It takes a lot to offend me. I was so offended at how demeaning they were that I was like, I just gotta go. I couldn't even go for information. I was so annoyed with them.
Yeah, my experience has generally been with firearm salesmen that they're most are trying to help. Mm-hmm. I for sure have come across the ones that haven't, and that's what.
And
this
there
is
are
going
some
back to the
places that
part where I said you're lucky. The other thing is like with ranges, there's always the range safety officer, and some of the range. Sorry, Joe. I know that you've recently gotten your qualifications, so I don't want to beat up on range safety officers.
Either to help you.
We'll be holding you to task, just so you know.
But some of them are just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Granted, everyone's safety is of seriously high importance, of course.
Yeah.
But the way there's a thing called tact, and a lot of people that wind up getting those certifications for some reason, there's a good percentage of them that just don't have the tact that's required.
Sure.
They really drive a lot of people, I think, especially women away, but men too.
I mean, now
They drive people away from this industry because they get yelled at, they get belittled, they get laughed at. I've had people show me their firearm and they have the magazine loaded backward. And like you could laugh at them and make them feel like crap, or
Yeah.
you could take the opportunity to
Sure.
educate them. Nobody does that on purpose.
And honestly, I think that I took what I knew from my other business in real estate and tried to replicate that business model to here. We did, and tried to really say, everybody that walks in the store is a customer, and they're or not. But in any case, it's a business, and you've got to be nice to people. You've got to be happy. You can't be. And I don't understand. I do understand how that's fallen, by the wayside. I get it, but I'm glad that we don't do that. But when it comes to training now, going back to what you were asking, I think about since I've been certified, and I think about how passionate I am because I didn't realize how much I didn't know, and how shocked I was to think that there's no way I'm getting my firearm out of my crossbody holster purse in a 12-foot distance to actually protect myself. And I think that a lot of people are probably in my position. I don't think they realize that.
I agree with you 100%. My wife took the conceal carry class the same time I did with Leigh.
Okay.
So we got our license essentially the same time. I purchased a firearm to conceal carry earlier than she did. But she's been shooting firearms for quite a while. When she was a kid, her dad would take her out. So she's not new to firearms. And Leigh, obviously I'm a little biased, phenomenal instructor. I have learned
undoubtedly.
Thanks, that's very
a
helpful.
monumental amount about firearms, about carrying a firearm, about safety, regardless of a firearm. Where I was going is that if you're carrying a firearm for personal defense and you are not carrying chambered and you have a manual safety to disengage,
You're not going to have time to deal with.
in that second and a half, possibly 2 seconds, that is a lot to get done to be prepared to then fire.
So I have an analogy for that. So when people
Oh, I
come
do
in-
like your
I
analogy.
like this. So when people come in and they're like, "Oh, I can't carry chambered," I was like, "So you don't wear a seatbelt?" And they go, "What do you mean?" And I go, "Well, you got time to put your seatbelt on before the accident, right?" And they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, "It's the same thing. You have no idea when you're going to need it, and you definitely don't have time to put your seatbelt on before an accident." So.
I think the reality is that you may have time, but you can't assume that you will.
Right. There are
So
times you're in the back of the store.
You
there's
certainly
a bumper.
might have plenty of time to chamber around, operate a safety. At the same time, we're talking about two different things here. Like also, we're talking about a competency issue. If
Going back to what we were talking about earlier.
If you were to tell me, my choice is between not carrying at all, or I'd carry most of the time or all the time, but I'm not carrying with the round in the chamber, I'll take not the round in the chamber.
Sure. Less reveals.
If you were to tell me, like, in order to make concealed carry for me to work, I've got to carry in a purse, like, okay,
Sure.
like carry in your purse, and then train that way, and let's get speedy. Let's get to a point where we're not digging into our Louis Vuitton bag and like it's compact and lipstick and then gun.
Sure.
Right.
I would agree.
Let's get the gun first.
Yeah.
Because there's ways around it. We can train to it, and we can educate people. That if you're purse carrying or your bag carrying, what have you, they call it off body carry, blah blah blah, all that stuff. You're carrying in a bag. Sometimes that's the target, right? So if it's a robbery, if it's an armed robbery, whether it's a purse snatching or whatever, like your firearm is in that bag, and so, but knowing about that, and that's getting back to sort of like some of the things that maybe that help people out there in the audience to sort of dispel. I think that most people, most instructors, I think there are a lot of instructors that are really good, like the gentleman you trained with. I think that most people that get into this realm, especially on the CCL side, you've got 16 hours of training, an investment of time, money. People are going to be pretty conscientious. But there are bad instructors. There are awful range safeties, awful RSOs, and there are a lot of people that do really dumb shit with firearms. And the more we can get out there, and the more we can do things to help educate people, I think the better off as an industry we will all be. Just to keep in mind, I was just reading an article that came out a few years after concealed carry was adopted in Illinois. I can't remember if it was the Tribune or the Chicago Times or whatever it was at the time, but I saved the article and I was just looking at it today. And they talked about a man who was coming out of a bank in Chicago, and he was attacked by someone wearing a mask. The man was a concealed carrier who was coming out of the bank, and he fired numerous rounds, and he did strike the subject, and he did not get prosecuted. He was found by the prosecuting attorneys to have acted in self-defense. But the media, the news media, print media, was their whole point of the article was like, well, he fired all these rounds and some of them went into an office building, across the street. And so, we've got some training issues. We've got to fight against a media who wants to, deceive people. One of the things I want to do is I want to go and I want to look at maybe someone out in the audience, or maybe I'll do the research myself, or maybe we'll take a look at it, Joe. How many of police incidents, how many of their rounds miss?
Right.
From what I see, there's plenty.
Yeah.
And so, this newspaper article, the whole crux of it was, hey, we never thought about how it's going to be like, worse than the Wild West, because we're going to have all these concealed carriers firing off rounds all over the place. At the end of the day, there's mostly empty space in the world. There's not mostly people standing in every single spot.
Sure.
Right? I'm not trying to say we shouldn't be as accurate as possible with our firing, because we have liability on every single bullet that we fire. But at the same time, police do it all the time. Those rounds go somewhere, and most times no one is injured by those stray rounds.
It's an interesting concept.
I want to say,
Yeah, go ahead, Laura. Your eyes lit up. And
Jay just said, I think on the last couple of big studies that were shown, it was if 50 rounds were fired, only 4 hit. I mean, it's a big percentage, and that's from trained police.
Yeah, and it's not a bloodbath in the civilian population of innocent people being killed. So,
and I think some people would be surprised by that, but it goes back to somebody watches a television show and Jack Bauer takes a shot, 35 yards away with a pistol he just picked up, he never shot again, and it's a bullseye, and that's just not reality. I don't know what different departments' regulations are in terms of training with the firearm or requalifying with the firearm. I know I really enjoy shooting a lot. Yep. I'm a big fan of Mantis. I'm a really big fan. Yep. I also really enjoy live fire, even though it's static at a range, paper target. We were talking a little bit, like I just try and be as accurate as possible. I go out with Leigh in the real world, where we can implement some moving in holster draw. So I would say by a lot of standards, I practice or train a lot. And
you're a 1%er, Joe.
And I'm nowhere near as proficient as I want to be.
Yeah. Have you? Sorry to interrupt. But have you seen the Mantis X10 has the holster draw?
I've got it. Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Because you don't get to practice that.
I believe it was our third podcasts.
With Mantis, yep. I listened.
Oh yeah, we had Jake
Yeah.
from Mantis, and we discussed a lot of the advantages and how they came up with it, and a little bit of what they have coming up. And Mantis on the surface could come off as being a little pricey. If you just look at it and go, I can buy a fair amount of ammunition for this, but the data you can get back from Mantis and the practice and training you can do without even leave your pajamas on.
It's not cheap. I mean, it's not cheap. It's super cheap to go to the range. I mean, by the time you buy
Right.
ammunition and it's $20 to walk in the door, and
Right. And you start factoring that, the gain in ability you can get by practicing with Mantis, to me, is a no-brainer. It is by far worth its cost. And I'm a huge fan of that holster draw.
I love it. It's something we just don't get to train.
Right.
You go to the range, you practice your accuracy. You might do some holster draw, but you have no idea what you're shooting at. And so I pulled it out. Now what do I do? Right? And so having that holster draw and having the ability to target and then coupling the X10 with the Laser Academy and putting those two things together, the immediate data set that you're getting back is absolutely phenomenal.
Yes. And I
Get your Mantis right here.
Yeah.
Firearms.
Yeah, available at Voo Doo Firearms.
I really like the daily challenges.
Yeah.
I mentioned before on our podcast that I was sort of in a slump. I dry fire. I was brought up by some really good people. I had really good trainers my whole life, and I'm very fortunate to have had those experiences. And I was taught to dry fire very, very early. And so I've been doing it for a long time, but it got really stale. And so I'm disciplined, and I would go do it, but I was really just doing what I liked to do, and not doing the shit I hate to do.
Yeah.
And Mantis really helped me with that. The daily training is really good. You can see where you stack up against other people who train that day.
Yep.
And so it just, that competitive part of it, it's anonymous competition, but nonetheless competition. But
I didn't know that was an option.
It doesn't have to be anonymous. Like you could
I may play with it more now.
You can form groups. Like, so you and I, Laura, we could go like, okay, we're going to be a group. And then, like, we can look at each other.
I want to be on your
We can
group.
let you others' data and embarrass me, but that. But seriously, like, it's a really cool. It has so many cool features that'll motivate you to continue to do the training that you ordinarily might be like, I'm standing here alone and looking at a wall.
It's not.
It just makes it. There's an added element to it that's really, really brilliant.
What else is fun too is going on and downloading some of their fun targets.
Yeah.
Like you,
Yeah, absolutely.
You can get all kinds.
You've done that. I haven't done that.
yeah.
So what are these?
Hang on, I'll show you. I got one.
All right.
I'm gonna go show you.
On our page or on our website, there's a review page, and I actually reviewed the Mantis 10, and then I reviewed the Laser Academy, and yeah, you can print off interesting.
Take it from us. They really do have some interesting, fun targets.
And honestly, the biggest drawback, the biggest drawback to all of it, is resetting the trigger.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had talked to one of the contacts over there because I was going to write a review, and I said, that's the only negative I have about this whole thing is that between shots, you're resetting your trigger, and there are devices out there that can do that for you.
The pitfall of that is, and I've always been concerned about that. That's why I sort of got to you guys. I wanted to get to you guys early when a few of our more experienced shooters were picking up the Mantis. You can literally build really bad habits into your software system of operating.
Yep.
So we have to be careful with dry fire. In other words, I try to encourage students not to make their shooting practices like exercise. So like when we exercise and we do jumping jacks, the idea is like I want to do as many jumping jacks as I can in like 20 seconds if we're going for like a hit cardio or whatever, right? We're trying to get our heart rate up. And if you're constantly racking a slide right after you take a shot, right, and you're not You're not
gonna be
thinking or
muscle memory.
pausing.
Right.
You can really start to build that into your software a bit. Under a lot of stress, you could get some bleed over. And it's not impossible that you could train yourself to a point where you might, under a lot of stress, take a shot and rack your slide.
I can
Not the worst thing in the world, right? But certainly not
Ideal.
either.
We were talking yesterday, actually, Laura and I were talking about that's why our military is so good, is because they train so much that there is no other option. There is no other.
There's no thought process.
There's no. It's literally automatic. Like the things like I was on a ship on an aircraft carrier, and the fire is an aircraft carrier's worst enemy, right? Or any ship's worst enemy. And so we trained to the point of, you can't fail. Now, I did fail. So this is a fun story. So I decided it was, 1994, and I had decided I was going to make some popcorn. And I made popcorn the old-fashioned way. So I got some oil and I put it in the pot. And I looked over and there was a couple of dishes in the sink. And I thought, the oil's heating up. I'll put the lid on. I'll go over and I'll go get the dishes done. So I go back over to the dishes and I come back over and I take the lid off. Now, I've been through an unbelievable amount of firefighting training. And I'm standing here with the lid in my hand. And I literally flashed back to second grade with Fireman Friendly. And he says, use flour. If flour is not available, use milk. So I panicked. I'm standing here still with the whole lid in my hand. I go to the refrigerator, open the refrigerator, and get milk. And I poured milk onto the grease fire. Now, milk did work to take out the grease fire. However, it also created a mushroom cloud that then went all the way up to the ceiling and then down the walls, and the entire walls and ceiling were now black. So it's now 10:30 at night, and I've got kitchen cleanser out scrubbing the ceiling instead of enjoying the popcorn that I so dearly wanted. So, but it's that very thing that I think that training and like I know
competent trainers, right? Like competent trainers, like
you've trained an inordinate amount. I've trained an inordinate amount, but there's still that propensity to flash back to the first lesson, and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? And so I think, to your point, I think training properly is the most important thing we can do.
Absolutely, and that's why some of my favorite drills with Mantis and Laser Academy are all the ones that involve single shot.
Yep.
Particularly holster draw from different distance. Holster draw, get on target, first shot. Again, trying to get to that 1.5 seconds. Pardon me. Which, to be quite honest with you, I am in live fire. I'm not at 1.5 seconds yet.
So what I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about it, Lee. What is the brain processing speed to recognize the threat, to then make the decision to pull? I know these numbers, but I can't remember them. I think at the end of the time it's all over. I think you only get like 0.8 of a second.
So, Lee, I know you're going to know more about this. Is that I read that your brain actually does recognize the threat, but that's why people say that things go in slow motion, because your brain is processing so quickly that you miss stuff.
Well, I think you're talking about threat discrimination, about whether the thing that has startled you is a threat or not. And this goes to a lot of the research and training I've gotten from Tony Blauer. I try to mention Tony as much as I possibly can because he's absolutely had a huge influence on, impacted my viewpoint on training. And so what you're talking about is discriminating a threat, and we can do that really quickly. So this is a good example of that. Is like if you're out on an athletic field, in a softball game, maybe you're out in left field and you get a little bit bored. You're standing there and a bee flies in your face, right? And you didn't notice at first, and it flies right by your eyes, and so of course you start to flinch, which means you start to move away from the stimulus, right? So that's your autonomic nervous system, right, will react. It's not cognitive. You don't think about it. you start doing that before any cognitive thoughts take place. So you'll already be moving away from the bee. And the next thing that'll happen is that your hands will start to come up to intercept what your body has already perceived as a potential threat. And that happens really, really quickly. So, I'm going to just throw some numbers out there. I might be off by a few tenths of a second, but, maybe 0.3 of a second. And this is the reason why you don't throw a beautiful uppercut punch at the bee, right? even if you've trained in boxing for years and years and years and years, your body's airbag goes off, right? It says, "Oh shit, something tried to get me in the face," right? But then in that fraction of a second, it has already threat discriminated and said, "Hey, it's just a bee." Right? And so you look ridiculous, right? Because you startle flinched and moved away and your hands came up, and then you kind of, you look around, you look left and right to see if anybody saw you. But that happens really, really quickly. So threat discrimination and reacting to a threat, sudden, that suddenness, the violence of it, the proximity of it. So the sort of the aggression, the proximity, and the unexpectedness of it will all impact your reaction time as well.
Sure.
So there's play there, right? Another thing that'll impact it is like how comfortable are you in the place where you are, right? So if you're walking through, if you've ever walked through like the woods at night, and every little sound or anything that touches you, right, you immediately react to.
You're hyper alert.
But totally different than when you're sort of sitting on your couch in your living room, right? And you feel something on your arm, right? And you don't automatically assume that it's a bat crawling around your arm, right? You just go, "Oh, what's that?" And you look and like you just kind of swat away something, right? And it's very low key. You still you had this sort of like micro flinch. You're kind of like, "Ooh, something touched my arm," right? But if that had happened in the woods at night and it was pitch black, like you'd have a much bigger reaction. So those factors play into how you'll respond to a sudden stimulus that causes a reaction. The problem with violence is that not all violence is like that. And so, a lot of it's sort of very chic or in vogue, to talk about like having to react to situations, like on the spot. And we can spend a lot of time thinking about, trying to get our draw stroke down, to, 1.2 or even sub 1 second draw strokes. But not all violence will happen that way. Like violence is this big, ugly animal. And sometimes you'll wish you had a 0.9 second draw stroke, right?
Sure.
And sometimes you'll have, 10 seconds
But I think
Right.
that's what.
to get your gun out.
You start becoming hyper aware. You become not hyper aware, but you become more aware of your surroundings, and you go into your threat levels, and you go, maybe I should be.
Maybe I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I mean there's a.
Well, that's where your work gets done, right? Like
Yeah.
if we're, and this is going to a lot of Coach Blauer stuff, the closer you get to the X where the violent event is happening, the least your choices are less advantageous.
Yes.
You could have a 0.9 second draw stroke and still lose.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. So, the closer, so where do we want to do our work? We want to do our work way before that timeline. We want to be avoiding.
Yes.
We want to be detecting so that we can evade potential problems. And all of those actions that we take there in responding to stimulus, all of those actions are high yield, right? Those will benefit us a lot, right? So if you look through the store that you're about to go into and you actually use the windows that are there and look into the store before you walk into there, that will yield you getting into a habit of doing that.
That's part of
You're
training,
almost
yeah.
guaranteed to be successful if there's a violent event going on in the store, right? However, if you're relying on your 9/10 of a second draw stroke, that means you just walked blindly into the store,
Right.
and now you're in the middle of an armed robbery, and you're counting on your 9/10 of a second draw stroke to save your life or save somebody else's life. Hell of a lot better if I had noticed that from the sidewalk outside, and I just, I call the police.
Get
And
back
so
in the car.
that's where you and it's not fun from a firearms perspective, right? Because we're not punching holes in targets. But that's where if you want to be a good protector, that's your bread and butter right there.
Agreed.
One of the training things that I was that was mentioned and recommended, it doesn't have to be a day during the week, but take a trip out once a week and spend the day, just as an example, to check how you're observing your surroundings. See if you can tell who's carrying and who's not.
I look all the time.
Just
All
make that
the
be the fun, make it a game.
Yeah.
And it just becomes like everything else that you're hoping with your training, a natural instinct where your awareness is maybe as good as your draw, where you're not just focused on the 10 feet in front of you. You're kind of, and I've gotten used to that as an agent, and that's what brought me to this years and years ago to get my concealed carry license. I had an incident. It scared me. It ended up not being an incident because I didn't allow it to become one, because I had some training about how to be safe during showings or with strangers and whatnot. And maybe if I had not been aware, I could have, we may have been having a completely different conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think about prevention and avoidance and de-escalation as key, because at the end of the day, any incident, no matter who you are, you're going to have to deal with it financially. You're going to have to deal with it morally, emotionally, physically, and I think there's a lot more that goes into it than most people think.
There's an instructor out there in internet land that I should find his name and give him the props, but he sort of calls guns the life-changing device.
Yeah.
Right, and if you get to the point where you have to use that 1.2 second draw stroke, your life everything after that is going to be completely different.
Forever.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
So I like to. Since I've gotten certified to be an instructor, I've tried to do that at least once a week, whether it's a trip out or whatever, and just paying attention when I walk out to that car. I'm looking under the car, under the tires. I'm looking at the person. I am definitely more aware of my surroundings today than I was even just that 16 hours of training. I am more aware today. There were just some things in that left a lasting impact on me that I just won't ever forget. That video was one of them that
It's
we
huge,
saw.
isn't it?
It was huge. I was so embarrassed in your class. I was embarrassed. I was just trying to come and see Leigh for training, and you showed that video, and I was so struck by how quickly it could go so badly in your neighborhood with your neighbors. And I think about instances that I've watched my son have, or any of us, and knowing how quickly you just don't know what's going on with other people, and it left an impression, and I hope to leave that impression with my students going forward, and that's why I think I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah.
I
could tell. Sorry, go, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just, based on
The video or the Pennsylvania snow shoveling shooting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the
terrible.
one I showed.
Well, so, and here's the thing: the reason I asked you for that link, it's not easy to find the unedited clip.
Yeah.
And so most
the case with so many of those. Yeah.
Most public people got a glimpse of it. Yeah, they kind of know. That's not the same as seeing it happen.
Right.
No, it isn't.
And it was
that's accurate.
life-changing for me.
That's accurate. But I think you will end up training and teaching people that, because it does seem like such a high priority and important thing to relay to people, that I think you'll do just fine with that.
So do I.
Are you going to specifically try to train females? Because do you think there's a niche there where females want to be taught by a female?
Yes. And so one of the things that what I was saying earlier is I'm going to host my first realtor safety course. It's a mini course. We're going to host it at my brokerage.
That's a great idea. Sorry to interrupt.
When's the
That's a
date
great
for this?
idea.
When's it coming up?
I'll have to look and
Yeah, go ahead.
It's July.
Yeah, do that. Yep.
So what you're doing, though, is taking what you've learned to be a USCCA instructor, and you're going to take that into your other career, teach fellow agents
Yes.
on I love it.
Even just a quick, it's July 16th, and we're doing it in our Wheaton location. And right now we've kept it just with the within the brokerage, within the Keller Williams brokerage. But and I brought it to my market center leader and said, I think that we really need to think about this. There were a couple of things. Generally speaking, we are taught some safety precautions when we get started, but we have the agent that was killed in Indiana, and they kidnapped her and killed her and found her later. It rocked the real estate world.
I didn't hear about that.
It was horrible.
Yeah, it would be.
And so there's things that I learned in just the USCCA mini course that I really wanted to pass along. And, one of those is something that I don't ever think of. And I'm kind of in it now, right? And so this went right past my head. Knowing where to park your car when you go in. And sometimes I'm meeting with a client that I know, but that doesn't mean I know what we're walking into. And just even parking my car, they'll flatten your tires. You come out and now you're messing with your car. And here in the Chicagoland area, we all know that half of the year it's dark at 4:30.
Right.
And it's dark. So half the year I'm working in the dark. So, you need to know your area, and you need to know, and we have, apps there's been times where I've texted Joe, I'm meeting so-and-so, this is where I'm going. I don't ever go anywhere. And I think as in my profession, we get complacent, and that's not just with real estate. We talked, we were just talking about that in life.
Yeah.
You get complacent. And I think about how many times I've opened myself up to and think, thank God there wasn't anybody looking to do something, because I was wide open and they could have done whatever they wanted, whether I was at an open house or showing a property or with a client that I didn't know. So I just want to, and it's just a mini class. It's just a 45-minute to an hour mini class just to pass along some information. And then, also just thinking about, having self-defense insurance. Like what, you've got now,
Have a plan for afterwards.
You've got to have, right. Yep. So
Absolutely.
like I said, this goes along to me not realizing how much I didn't know, and now just trying to get as much information as I can. I'm so passionate about it, because I don't think that I didn't know how much I didn't know when I was carrying before I went through the training.
And I'm all for females taking classes with males.
Yeah.
Right. I'm all for males taking class with the female instructor.
But yeah, I'm sorry. And to go back to that real short in one sentence, we just had a lot of people request it, stood here and said, my wife wanted to go, but she wants to be taught by a woman.
Yeah.
A ton of people said it.
My wife. We have a phenomenal resource of a trainer, right? Sure. Right next to me that we're friends with, and she felt a little bit more comfortable. We went, was it September? We went to the USCCA convention up in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Yep.
And there was a couple classes up there with Lena.
Yeah.
And my wife signed up for both of the classes, and she said, I like being able to take advice from someone else that has boobs. I have to draw stroke differently than you do.
We talked about that when we opened the store. I bought a new beautiful Smith & Wesson, and I said, well, Joe goes, well, you need a holster for in here. And so I
bought her a guy's holster.
He bought me a holster.
Sure.
And he bought it to
Why
me,
wouldn't you?
and I put it on, and I was like, no, the gun is sitting in my armpit. Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Because of where my belt was. Like, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so there were several things that prompted me to really get involved. It started with going to the SHOT Show. Then it progressed into even something as simple as him buying a holster for me, that I was like, this is why. This is it right here. This is the reason.
Yeah.
And not for everybody, but I know I can just speak from my own experience. It's intimidating. I'm walking in the store. I have no idea what I'm looking at. I'm completely vulnerable. Somebody could try to upsell me. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not comfortable, and I don't want to feel stupid. Nobody wants to feel stupid.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of people are afraid that they will, and aren't comfortable asking questions. And then he started asking me to attend some of the gun shows that we went to, because that's something that you need kind of all hands on deck. And and Joe does very well with women, maybe because, well, you're a kind person, but also, you've got me to go, I don't even know what this is. What are you saying? So he's kind of getting used to me,
Right.
Feedback from me. But we would go to gun shows and women would automatically gravitate toward me where I was standing.
I could
And
see
it was
that.
funny because at that point I was like, I don't know anything. That's the guy you want to talk to. So
Yeah. And I could see that because I've had friends that are beginners that have said, and I'm sure everybody here has heard it, like, I am thinking about getting a concealed carry firearm. What do you think I should get?
that's a huge. What kind of shoes do you want to wear today?
Right. So it's like, well, I've got a decent assortment. Let's go out, try several things, see what, fits and stuff like that. My wife would feel intimidated. And she's like, well, you and Leigh have been shooting for, so long and this. And I'm like, don't worry about it. She just had more comfort with a female.
Yeah.
My favorite saying, and I use it ever since I heard it from Leigh, and my favorite saying that I use when people come in is, well, what are you most comfortable carrying every day?
Yeah.
So what's the biggest gun you can carry every day? If you can't carry it, it's useless. If it's too small, it's useless. If
Right.
it's too big, it's useless. Find the one that you want to carry every day. And that's the one.
And now I say, what's the best gun for concealed carry? The one that you'll actually carry.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So
Doesn't do any good.
It's not too
I
heavy.
mean,
it's not
it
too-
might, like, if
yeah,
it's not impossible that the gun in the center console
you might get lucky.
might save your life. It's possible, but nothing beats having it pretty much attached to your body.
Yep.
Yeah.
So with that being said, do you have a preferred firearm to carry on a daily basis?
I'm gonna let her go on.
Oh, he's like, I'm going to walk away for this because
fun-
what's
this
going to
is a
happen
fun
is he's going to go, if you had just listened to me, we could have saved probably a couple of $1,000. So,
It's okay. There's a lot of people in that same boat.
well, so
Some of them are sitting at this table.
Right.
I know. So I will say that I started out, I wanted a little bit of information from him, but I didn't want to, and he was good. He didn't want to tell me what to do. And I had to be realistic. What am
awesome.
I actually going to carry every day? So knowing what I wear to work, knowing that I wanted to carry on my body and not carry in a crossbody, my very first concealed carry gun was an LCP2.
Okay.
Sounds great. But I was it's not the first time I've been around firearms. I've been around them my whole life. I've gone shooting very often. There was a time before Joe that I, shot a lot. But I took that after I carried it for a year without really training with it, took it to the range. And I can promise you that I would have been better off throwing that gun at you than I would have been shooting you with it. Because
It's not easy. It's not easy gun
No.
to work with. You would have had to.
I was so.
I have a family that a husband and wife that both chose that firearm, and they'll rock your world with it right
Well,
now.
I would like to.
But they had to train. They
I would
really
like to
had
graduate
train hard.
to that because there's plenty of times I'm working outside in 95-degree heat. I'm wearing a sundress.
Yep.
Where am I putting?
Right.
So, with that said, that's why I started going, all right, I'm not carrying ever because of what I'm wearing in the summer. So I was carrying the LCP2. Then I graduated into the Smith & Wesson Easy. It was still a 380. It was light enough.
Popular gun,
The Easy
too.
Slide.
Yep.
It was great, but it was too big.
Kind of big side.
So then it was going in my crossbody. I was no longer carrying it on my body at all. So I graduated that because I was more accurate with it, which I thought was great. And the sights were beautiful, and I could put it in a crossbody. So it was okay if it was a little bit bigger. So now here we are, gun number 2. This is why I said to Joe before we got started on all this, why do people need so many guns? I don't understand why you need 7 different ones for concealed carry, one for... Now I understand. So now we're up to gun number 2.
Gotcha.
So now after this one, I was like, this is still too big, but the LCP2 is too small. So what do I get in between? Well, at that time, that was right when we were opening the store. So then I went to the big M2 point because I wanted an open carry. So now I've got the Mac Daddy, the M2.0.
All metal.
The all metal one, and it's big.
The one my wife won that one.
It's wonderful.
in
Oh, she
Colorado.
did?
Yeah, but they haven't. We're having problems with Smith and Wesson shipping it because of the magazine capacity.
So that's a beautiful, beautiful firearm. That's what I qualified with for my instructor certification.
On irons, I might say.
On irons. Joe had set it up with hollow suns, and I was like, "Get it off!" I was like, it was
good
making
for
me
you.
The learning curve
inaccurate.
there.
So that's beautiful. And now, so finally, I said to him, "I need something in between the LCP2 and the 380 easy, and so I settled on the Shield.
Oh, wait. Let's not forget.
That Joe told me about the Shield, the very first gun out.
And then
Before the LCP too.
He's not gonna let that go.
He goes, I think you want a Shield, and I was like, no, that's too big.
So then it was, no, I want the SIG P365. I go, no, you don't.
And so then I went to
rent it.
I went to rent it.
She goes, yeah, you're right. It's not good.
Yeah.
And she's like, I want a Hellcat. I'm like, no, you don't. So she comes back. She's like, no, I don't. So after probably 3 months.
I didn't even want it. So you know how that moment when
you know
gotta,
why, Joe?
I do actually.
Yeah, could you? I think you could help the audience out a lot because I think those are the most popular size. Do you agree?
I do.
Like that size is super
100%.
popular.
Do you know how hard it was though to have to come back into this store and look him in the face, and he's like, "What are you doing over there?" And I go, he goes, "What? I see you touching. Is that the Shield in your hand?" I said, "No."
Yeah.
I go, "I think I'm gonna get the Shield."
So that's it.
That's
today.
it. My Shield, and
Okay.
it's the 9mm.
So all right. I'll start with my typical sales speech. So Smith & Wesson rewrote the book with the M&P Shield. They prior to that, if you wanted a concealed carry, you were carrying a 38. I mean, or you were carrying a small 380, or maybe like the HKP P7. You know, there weren't a lot of guns for concealed carry, and Smith kind of rewrote the book with it, and then others kind of jumped on board. And so I always call them like the granddaddy of the carry and conceal. And then SIG came out with the 365. And if you've got, so people get tied up on brand, and everybody's like, it's a SIG. I want a SIG, right? And so it's like, all right, great, you got 6 hour, good for you, but can you shoot it well? And they usually can't because the grips are so narrow that your whole hand wraps around itself and you're not holding the gun properly. You're not sighting properly. You're not doing anything you're supposed to do properly. And the round count is low. So, okay, so now you get the XL. All right. Still has a very small grip. Then you can go to the Hellcat. Hellcat, not a bad gun.
Why didn't I like the 365?
Too small. And it was too snappy.
I didn't like the trigger.
Oh, and the trigger. So
Awful.
yeah.
Awful.
And the Hellcat.
Sorry, not all of them.
No, you can feel
I've just
it.
found them to be.
The Hellcat.
Sorry, Sig.
Yeah. If you're
I found them to be pretty inconsistent with their triggers.
100%. If you're going to buy a Hellcat, buy an Apex trigger right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even shoot the gun.
That's exactly what I came back after renting it, and I said, he goes, how did you like it? I go, I don't like the trigger. I was looking for something
squishy,
flat that was more concealable and not too heavy. So that's what was driving my
Makes sense.
They're squishy.
Choice.
They're the sight. The people don't actually like the U sights that come on a Springfield. They think they do until they go out and shoot them, and they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, well, I told you. So, and then invariably and inexorably, we end up back at the Shield. And so there are people who...
and everybody's different.
Everybody's different.
But there's still a consensus.
And so what I typically do is I start them with all the guns that they think they want, and then we end up at the Shield. And then they go, wow, I really like this. And so I'm like, yeah, that's why I took you here last. So you want to go back and look at anything else? And they're like, no.
That's exactly what happened Sunday.
It is. And
Exactly what happened with that gentleman that was.
Interesting.
Yep.
And
that's what he went with.
Yep. And I walked him through the entirety of the store. We held and touched every gun in the store, as far as large, small, whatever.
But it's such a personal preference.
It is.
But it's unbelievable.
I think why it's so popular is because it's narrow, it's high capacity. You can get 15 rounds. You can get 15 round magazines in a Shield. You've got reliability. You know, Smith & Wesson has developed that.
It's sleek.
To its absolute perfection. Now, I am a little biased. I'm a Smith master dealer, so I do like Smith, but I just find it to be the most usable, most user friendly. It has great. It doesn't need work. You buy a Glock 43, Glock 43X. Everybody buys a Glock 43. Why? Because they can modify it. Well, why are you modifying it? To make it less like a Glock? Isn't that the whole point of buying a gun is so that you can have the one, right? Mm-hmm. So you buy it. It's good out of the box. There's plenty of holsters and other accoutrements available for it, and there's other things and accessories that are available. So whatever you need, it's there. You don't have to do modifications to it.
Pretty widely used by
Yeah.
law enforcement as well, I think.
And Smith & Wesson has great customer service.
They do.
They do. Everything I've read and everything I've seen, I haven't had any issues with Smith & Wesson, but everything I've seen online and everything I've read, I'm obviously in all sorts of different groups, and I've heard great things about their customer service.
So, but that's been my experience, and I don't drive people there. I always take them on the trip. We go down the same journey every time, and then I go, where do you want to go? And like I said, I'd say probably 80% of people settle on a Shield.
Well,
It's a very
strong
high
statement.
number. Very, very high number.
it's cool.
And you get your people that are just absolute diehard Glock or diehard SIG. They're not going to move off of it. That's
Right.
fine.
And it depends on where they carry and where they're, I mean,
So-
and what they wear on a day-to-day basis will determine what
And that's
you're really,
that's another thing too, is holster choice is so important, you know?
That's something I usually bring up to people when they're asking me about what would be a good concealed carry firearm. And I'm like, whatever you're looking at, one of the important things to also look at is what else do you want or need to buy for that firearm, and what is the aftermarket support for it?
So there's two that I like that I recommend. And if you guys have others, I'm more than interested to hear because I'm constantly learning. But there's a company out there called Raw Dog Tact. They're not a super popular company, but they do make a good quality product. And what I like about them, and I like Urban Carry, and the reason why I like both of them specifically is I'm not a skinny man, and I have a jelly roll, and I like the ability to have inside the waistband with a single clip on my belt so that I can reposition it to wherever I want to position it. If it's uncomfortable, I can kick it forward.
move it.
If it's uncomfortable here, I can. If I'm sitting in a car, I can move it to a different position. And then also, they have the pancake that is on the inside, the leather portion. So the outside is Kydex and the inside is leather. And so you have this leather portion that absorbs all the poking parts of the gun that are normally digging into your body, and they're being absorbed by that leather pancake. And then I like the ability to have the Kydex because then I don't have to worry about it over compressing or doing something that it's not supposed to.
And that's the Raw Dog?
Both of them do the same thing. So, but that's why those are my choices. But I would love to hear, especially with your experience, I would love to hear what you do.
I hate them all. No. Wow. Yeah, holsters. I've had good luck and success with Alien Gear. Their regular cloak tuck, I hate the names and everything. Like their 3.0 for the same reasons that it's got neoprene on the back, Kydex on the outside. I really like double clips because I do like a consistent and fast draw stroke, and so I like my holster to not move at all. So I like it to stay put and be in the same spot all day long, every day, no matter what. If I'm working, if I'm moving at a range, but even if like I said, if I'm working around the house, whatever I'm doing, if I'm mowing the grass, I want my holster to be exactly where I wear it all the time. So that's why I like that. Two clips sort of far. I do carry strong side. I don't carry appendix. I know that appendix has become very popular in the last 20 years.
I'm not a big appendix guy.
Firearms, a lot of people that I respect a lot carry appendix.
it's easy for me as a woman to conceal it there
Yeah.
or with a belly band.
Yeah. So Alien Gear has worked out well. I made that recommendation to you. I think that holster has worked out well for you, right, Joe?
Short answer is yes. Very
And
well.
I really like right now Tier 1 concealment. That's what I have on right now. They're all Kydex, but they make a holster specifically for strong side. So many of the holster manufacturers are really orienting toward that appendix carry. Tier 1 concealment makes one specifically for a strong side carry, and that's what I carry.
Me too.
And I really like them a great deal.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm looking at Tier 1.
Yeah, Tier 1
Tier 1
concealment.
and Alien. I know Alien Gear I have a couple of them.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm just like, for uber comfort,
Yeah,
it's nice, and they're very reasonably priced.
they are.
And the quality really is there. Like I have my original. God, I don't even know how old that thing is, and it's still holding up. There were people that complained about safety and stuff. I've had it all these years, trained with it, used it, and it works fine for me. And so I do have for my newer firearms, I do have an alien gear just to as a fallback, because I really do. I think concealed carry has to work for you, and probably for most people out there, you'll have a few different options to carry depending upon the time of year. You might have a couple options depending upon the climate. Like your clothing choices, like what you're getting dressed for.
So now that I have this array of firearms in my house for carrying, depending on especially like in the winter, it's easier for me as I'm wearing sweaters and bulky whatever. It's easier for me to wear the belly band because it's not showing at all. Where other things, depending on the cooler weather. I am wearing stuff that's less bulky, and so I've got it dialed. The firearm, it needs to be smaller, needs to be closer to my body, inside the waistband. When we're here, I have an alien gear, drop waist leg, because then I can just do whatever I want. What do they call it?
Drop leg.
A drop leg. That's super comfortable. It's completely out of, and I can open carry here, so I don't need to worry about that. That's when I carry the bigger one,
Very nice. I want to come back to something you mentioned. You said, was it with the Hellcat dropping Apex trigger?
Oh, yeah.
Is that the Apex Tactical Specialties?
Yeah.
We have a friend with a Hellcat. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to him about it.
So I had bought an Apex trigger to drop into a 509T. And from what I understand, when FN designed that firearm and that trigger, it was designed to not be replaced. So it was a pretty complicated, especially for me with limited, gunsmithing experience. It was a pretty complicated and long installation. In fact, part of just buying or just doing that install, they strongly recommend from Apex buying a jig.
Yeah.
That helps line everything up for the proper pins. So just to do an install, you're buying a jig. But I put that Apex trigger in my 509T, and what a difference! I wrote up a review on our page about the 509T in general.
Yeah, I was so disappointed when you had me go and you were struggling with shooting it, and you had me go and
out of the box. It's like a 9-pound trigger, and then I swapped it, and it didn't take long to just really fall in love with it. And that Apex trigger, I am telling you, it transformed that gun. And not on Apex's side, but on FN side, the 509T is not an inexpensive firearm. And the only disappointment I have in that firearm whatsoever is that you pay a premium to then swap the trigger. But I've grown to love that firearm with that Apex trigger. So to hear that it drop one of those in a Hellcat right away, I'm not surprised. If it changes the Hellcat the way it changed my 509T, just do it out of the gate.
I would tell you that if we were having a conversation and you said, "What do you think of the Hellcat stock?" I'd say I hate it. If you asked me, "What do you think of the Hellcat with an Apex trigger in it?" I would say arguably one of the best guns on the market.
It's that much of a difference.
It's amazingly different. It radically changes it.
I mean, it didn't take much. I didn't need to know much about firearms, about pistols at all, and certainly not anywhere near an expert. Like I said, again, baby steps. So if there's 100% to know, I might be at the 25% mark. And it only took me one time to, shooting just what I had shot in our personal collection to go, oh yeah, I don't like the trigger on this gun.
Yeah.
And Joe goes, "You're going to love that gun. Needs trigger job." So
world of difference.
I didn't know, and I said to him, I go, "What does that mean exactly?" Because I don't. He goes, "You'll see. You'll understand. Take it after you shot your M2, after you shot your all your other stuff. You go shoot that, and you'll understand. I don't even have to give you a descriptive." And it was immediate. I was able to go,
Well,
needs a trigger.
what else I like about Apex is Scott gets in a bunch of the Facebook groups, and he's very active. He's answering questions like real time.
Their customer service is unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
They go through and they put the videos together to walk you through it. They give you all the angles so that you can figure out if you accidentally take something apart and forget. Like I'm not a dealer or a carrier of Apex. I'm working on becoming that because I believe in their product so much. And there's other products out there. I mean, you got your rare breed triggers, you got your other stuff out there, and they're great. They're great. But I've been absolutely swept off my feet by Apex.
Oh, what's the pistol that you have that I love so much that you said now you got to shoot
my
this?
H&K, my VP9. Yeah.
He goes, now here you go. Now shoot this.
So in another one of Laura's I'm going to do what I want moments. Yeah. She was qualifying for her.
Can't imagine where my kids get it from.
Yeah, right.
She was qualifying for her certification, and she was brought out her M&P 2.0, and she was just hell bent on getting proficient with it. And I said, "Hey, why don't you use my VP9?" "No, I'm using this." I said, "Okay." So the last time I brought it up, she got qualified, and then we went to the range like the next day, and I brought out and I said, "Hey, why don't you try my VP9?" She goes, "All right, now that I'm proficient and I've qualified, I'll do it." And she goes, "It has no recoil." Yeah, I know. She's like, "Why didn't you let me use
It has
this?"
no
I'm like,
recoil.
"I remember
The trigger is
this
so
conversation."
smooth. Everything about this gun is perfect. It's like butter. He goes, "I told you, dude."
Yeah.
Yeah, I have little to no experience with H&K. Shooting them. I haven't
my
had any
God, it
students
is
come through with
Most
them.
beautiful.
I'm still waiting. So Joe, bring your HK to a course,
Let's go. Have fun.
and yeah, that'd be cool.
They're fun.
Yeah. Again, real quick with the Apex. Also with the 509, they had some striker fails. So
They clean it up.
they did. It took a while.
I meant that Apex cleaned it up with the trigger.
No, but they offered a new heavy duty striker. So drop in a striker, drop in the trigger, and it's become a phenomenal. I love shooting that, and I struggled with it for a little while.
The 509T especially fits in your hand like it was built for your hand. So to know that that Apex has solved the
Internal.
the one downside of that firearm. It makes it
That's usually one of my carry firearms, 509T.
I like it.
What's yours?
Glock 43X.
He does.
It probably does.
I think he's probably stuck on what he's got.
Well, he went with SIG for a little while, and
I was very.
you had was it a striker fail or a firing pin?
I was teaching a course, and I went to demo the course of fire, and the gun broke.
Was it a 320?
It was a 365.
No kidding.
Early on.
It was early on when they were having all the problems. On SIG's behalf, they corrected the problem right away. I think the turnaround was like less than a week.
Wow.
They said, "Send it in to us." It was a broken spring that resulted in a completely dead trigger. So I literally fired, in the demo, I can't remember exactly, but 1 or 2 rounds and it broke.
Was it the trigger spring or
And
the spring?
it was a very tiny spring.
Okay.
Very tiny spring, and it just resulted in just a floppy dead fish of a trigger.
We don't really care. We don't even carry anything that has any known issues or pretty much everything that we just don't want to get stuck holding that.
So it's a machine, and anything is
Sure.
prone to failure. And so
We don't carry anything that's known for.
no,
The one thing that we had, we stopped carrying it.
which one?
The one that remember my inspector asked. He said I was having trouble.
Starts with a T.
Yeah, he said I'm having some trouble with some stuff, and
Yeah.
and he said, "Do you know anything about this? Ask your husband." And he goes, he's like, "Oh, is this the particular one?" He's like, "How did you know?" We go, "We all know." So we stay away from.
No, we have a couple.
Yeah.
We have a couple because people come in and they're bargain conscious, and so I tell them this is a problem.
We have a couple of different bargain that we have not heard one bad thing about any of them.
Just about every industry has entry level,
Yeah,
and for a reason.
Yeah.
for sure.
There are a lot of people that really are adamant about protecting themselves, and $380 or $400 is all they can spend.
And you know what? There's
we-
something to be said about that too.
Yeah.
And so the reality is God forbid the day comes that you have to use it. It's gone. They're taking it. It's gone. So
do you ever
if
do you ever even get it back? Does anybody know?
Sometimes you do.
Sometimes you do, and it's usually years.
Yeah. And if you got a staccato, you're out $2,500. It's gone.
I agree with you 100%. At that point, that's the least of my concerns.
Agreed.
But it still burns. Not only did you have to defend yourself, now you had to
Right.
defend yourself in court. You're out all this money, and you're like, at the end of the day, I lost my damn gun.
It will have vindicated all that money I spent on that awesome firearm.
We did a podcast with Dave McDermott, the attorney, and it was interesting because I talked to some people and some people I know after that interview, after that conversation with Dave. Some people were like, well, I was going to go get my concealed carry, but now I don't know if I want to. Hearing all of the stuff that Dave is talking about, you could be 100% in the right.
But that's where that goes back to the training.
Right, but you get charged. What do you say? Average 5 to 8 years.
Oh, if it's Cook County.
Cook County, and you could be
several
100% in the right, and that case can drag on for 5 to 8 or 9 years.
Yep.
Cost Uber's amount of money. You're dragged through the mud,
Yeah.
and that's if you're in the right,
Yeah.
and not have your firearm.
Yeah.
when
Only
you're done.
only the high profile cases do we see that go quickly and they're wrapped up in a short amount of time. That's if it's high profile. If you're nobody, you're buckle up.
But and that's where that USCCA insurance becomes so crucial, important, because I forget exactly, and I'm going to say the amount. I can be off a little bit, but I want to say like Dave McDermott's retainer is $50,000 to $60,000 just to get started on a self-defense shooting case, just to get started.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's other attorneys out there. It's not necessarily going to be a $50,000 or $60,000 retainer.
It seems like something you might want to spend some money on, though.
But I'm also certain, most lawyers aren't inexpensive.
No.
So if it's not 50, maybe it's 30.
No,
Right.
I mean, I had somebody that just was dealing with a non gun and needed a defense attorney. $10,000 retainer just to walk in the door.
Just
And he's
right off the bat.
Here's my credit card, and he's like, "Look, I got this new cool swipe thing from Apple." And the guy was like, "You just so callously just took $10,000 of my money."
Just like that.
Just like that, it was gone. Like, thank God he had that amount available to him in credit.
Yeah.
We were talking about that there's good trainers and there's bad trainers. You need to you might encounter some of the bad ones. You might encounter a crabby guy at a gun store. You could certainly take recommendations here, and you won't go wrong. You could see Laura. You could see me for training. You could see Joe for buying Joe and Laura for buying your firearms. You could listen to our podcast and continue to get good information from people. But you still might wind up out there, and you might encounter some of these people that just aren't the best representatives of this industry. But where I was going was, that I was talking about the conscientiousness of people that own firearms, and I already mentioned that, people do a lot of dumb things with firearms. But also just, if the training is just shooting is the fun part, right? We all enjoy it. There's an art to it that's very, very pleasing. But there's a lot of nuances to training people for personal protection, for protecting yourself and your family. And so, I just saw a video. I don't know if you guys saw this. It was in the news, and there was a group of kids that jumped over a counter and were
Yes.
attacking a
Like
Chipotle.
Chipotle. I didn't know if it was Burger King.
It was
or
a
something
Chipotle.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
An employee, right?
Customers attacked the employees behind the counter.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard about it.
So that
And
was on X.
they were standing on the counter. It was really hard to see exactly what was going down, and I didn't spend a lot of time evaluating that one. But one of the things I immediately look for in situations like that is like, what are the rest of the people in the restaurant doing? And so maybe a tip for everybody out there. I like to put as much out there as I possibly can. The time for you to act is when you have the initial idea that a violent event is going to start to happen. So as soon as you start seeing the person in line getting really irate,
Identify.
those are the times for you to leave.
Yeah.
Grab your kids.
There were kids in that. There were parents with their kids in that Chipotle that stayed
Yep.
and watched the whole thing.
Well, that's unfortunately the world we live in now is rather than help, let's get our phone and video.
It's not just it's more than that, Joe. Like what people have to realize is that when you watch a video and it's CCTV, you're watching reality.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching other humans like you. And when I watch that stuff, I watch that with an eye toward it. And if I see a large group of people who don't know each other, right, and they all stay put when a violent event is happening in a venue, I don't say to myself, well, that won't be me. What I say to myself is that will probably be my instinct. My instinct will be to stay and do what all those other people are doing unless I've been trained otherwise.
Yeah. What do they say?
Unless I've taught myself
You will
otherwise.
not rise to the occasion.
You'll
do what your
do
muscles-
what other humans probably are doing given the same scenario.
Interesting.
You're not going to probably.
Interesting.
You're probably not going to be the person that sees it start to happen and immediately walk out.
You have, in the times when our kids were
what
little,
you'll
there's
probably
a couple
do
occasions.
is stay put. And so when you absorb that, right, but then you learn that where your job gets done as a protector for your family is you see the trouble starting to happen and you take the action now, not later on, because the longer you wait, the closer you are getting to the X, right? And if your bottom line is I didn't get killed today, like that's a pretty pathetic bottom line. We don't want to be traumatized. We don't want to be sued. We don't want to any of those things.
Have
right?
your kids witness
have your
it,
kids
any-
have your kids traumatized, right? And so your time to take action is when you first start seeing trouble rear its ugly head. Nothing that they're serving at Chipotle is worth you staying near the X, right? That's the time. Don't wait for your apple pie to come up from McDonald's when the guy starts axing the McDonald's, right, and busting the tables and busting the windows at the McDonald's. Your time to act is when you first see any hit of violence. And what you have to know about for most people is that you'll probably do exactly what most people do, which is, and I could show countless. Every time I see a restaurant one, the first thing I do is I don't even look at the violence that's happening because I could see it. There's people throwing. It's always the same. They're throwing stuff. They're jumping up on the counter. They're trying to do a battery on the people. And what I do is I first look at the people in the restaurant, and what I see is everybody staying put.
It's a profound perspective.
It is profound.
It's a profound perspective because what you said was as a protector of your family, right? And so if we're going to talk Second Amendment, we're going to talk concealed and carried, and you're there to protect your family. It's one thing to protect your family and have no other choice. It's a whole nother thing to say I'm protecting my family and then drawing your firearm and shooting somebody and now no longer being a part of your own family.
Yep.
So if you're going to say I want to protect my family, remove yourself from the situation.
The best way to do it is, and then think about that great lesson that you taught your kids, is that we don't stick around when violence happens and watch the show, even though our impulse might be to. Like, for whatever reason, our monkey brain keeps us on the spot. What we do is we use our human brain, our rational brain, to say, hey, this is trouble starting to happen, and you know what, we'll just go down to the other fast food place down the street.
So there's a thing, and I just talked to my son about this, and I know we're going long here, but I talking to my son, there's stuff you'll see on social media, and X is pretty famous for it, but you'll actually see people get shot. You actually see the entirety of the action, and there is something that it does to me personally, that it does to my soul, that it hardens your soul. It takes away your humanity. And when people watch that kind of stuff, and they watch those videos of those people jumping up on the counters, and they watch these assaults, and they watch these batteries and these murders, and they watch this stuff, it really does. It traumatizes your soul. It takes away your humanity. And so I think that if we were going to teach our children stuff, and I had this conversation with my son specifically, is don't let it damage your soul. When you feel that in your soul, get away from it. And when you're in that situation and you're on the scene and you feel that danger coming, don't damage your soul. Don't let your soul go to hell over something as petty as I could have walked out 5 minutes ago.
And we've all at our age been in a bar or a party and seen it.
Yeah,
Where you can feel it starting to get, and you're like, you know what? Time to go. Let's go right now. Let's go. Where it just starts, you can always feel it. Almost always. If you're involved, you can see it, you feel it, you know it. It's time to go. Don't second guess yourself.
Yeah,
go.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that came back to you, because that was
Coach Blauer always says choose safety. It's never wrong to choose safety.
Real quick before we wrap up. So that reminds me, there's another podcast I like to listen to a lot, and it's Patrick Bet-Dave.
Yeah, he's great.
He is great, and at one point
Very entertaining.
He was talking with personal security, so depending on where he's going, security detail, and he was interviewing them himself. He didn't hire it out, and he said he was speaking to one of the fellas, and Patrick came out and said to him, he goes, "It's not an insult. I'm not judging. It's an observation based on the people I've already spoke to. You're shorter, you're leaner, and you don't come across as intimidating at all." And he goes, "Good.
By design.
Then they won't notice me, and I don't want to fight anyone. My goal is to get you out of there if or before anything happens. Just not be there."
When I was making, $525 a day protecting diplomats in very dangerous places in the world, that was our number one goal. And if it's important enough for a VIP, if it's important enough for, the Secretary of State or a senator, if our protective detail sees it as the best choice of action for us to immediately remove our principal, the person we're protecting, if it's important enough for us to remove them from that as soon as possible, to protect them from liability, to protect them from being traumatized, then, or even embarrassed, right? Then if it's good enough for them, then why isn't it good enough for you and your family?
Yep.
Absolutely.
100%.
That's the way I approach the way I approach my training and my courses is from that perspective. We need to teach people to be their own family's bodyguards, and to do it the right way. And so that shouldn't be just for wealthy people, VIPs. Your family, you are the VIP for your family, and your family is your VIP, and that's the way you should be protecting them.
That's awesome.
Very good. Yeah.
So I think that's a great point to mention to everyone that June 15th, Leigh and I are going to have a booth at Manuka Summerfest.
Yeah, come and see us.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're going to set up the podcast. If anybody wants to come by, we'd love to talk to people about the Second Amendment, talk about firearms, speak to Leigh about training options. We will be there. We'll have the tent set up. We'll have a couple banners out. It won't be hard to find us, and we really, really hope some people do, and we look forward to it.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
Voo Doo Firearms, Joe and Laura, thank you so much for having us again.
It's, just like last
great.
time, this was an amazing time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Appreciate it so much.
I'd like to do it more regularly, and I really would love it for you to be able to enlighten the listeners with your journey as you begin to roll out courses and get more experience under your belt and stuff like that. I think
Well,
people
I love
would
to
really-
talk, so I'm happy to share.
I think people would be really interested. I know it's a big time commitment, but
Yeah.
And as some of your guys' plans develop, we would love to let people know about that.
We're putting a classroom in for sure.
yeah,
So
I'd love to do stuff in tandem too.
Love
if
to
you
have.
ever wanted to do
Absolutely.
it, working
I'm
together would be
100% in.
fantastic. Yep, I'd do it with you anytime.
Perfect.
That'd be cool.
I'm hold you to it.
All right. Let's do
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.